It can be intimidating to write video essays, but it might not be as intimidating as you think. I talked to an expert scriptwriter and researcher who's helped channels generate millions of views, and his approach actually might surprise you.
Bro, no one knows who you are. No one cares about you.
In this video, you'll discover why most creators misunderstand their viewers and how to fix it, how to create hooks that speak directly to your audience, and a research method that uncovers stories your competitors are missing out on. Yeah, we'd just like to know a bit about you and how you got into the world of script writing for YouTube videos.
Yeah, awesome. I suppose, like, just my passion for other things connected with YouTube. Like, it wasn't just YouTube. I'd be like, I'd want to talk about my favorite video games or whatnot. Or as I went from, like, just high school into, like, university where I did a lot of academia stuff and a lot of writing there and such, that kind of molded me a different appreciation for what goes into, like, a good essay and such like that. I'm always writing about, talking about video games because that's it still is a big passion point of mine.
How did you transition to just wanting to write about video games into like writing about business or other nuanced things that are random but also interesting?
Having a business degree helped me a lot. I put that on my like portfolio, and business owners or people with wanting business channels be like, oh, okay, you've got some expertise here and such. Taking on more roles with more varieties kind of helped attract like more clients in a broader sense. I also find no matter what you write about, people are going to ask you if like, oh, are you open to talking about like fitness or property or whatnot? So there's usually, even if you like are very specialized, there's usually a lot of like a variety coming your way. At least I've found.
Yeah, because I did a bit of freelancing myself, and I guess when you actually do freelancing, it's different than hiring for it. Because when you hire for it, it's like, oh, this person can just write or edit whatever I kind of ask for. But on the freelancing side of things, it's like, oh, I really don't like writing about health. So for you, why did you just really want to focus in on the video essay portion of writing?
There's nothing quite like a good essay, as weird as that is to say. It's like just, at least for me, the perfect medium to like educate people or like teach someone or make an argument for something or just express something. Doing a lot of academia kind of conditioned me to like write like that just naturally, because you can tell a story with it and such. As weird as it is to say, it's like my comfort zone, but it's also I try and go outside of that. Yeah, you can. It's a really good framework in my opinion. A very versatile framework.
Yeah, I mean that's essentially why I got into the video essay stuff too. Initially, I started off doing like regular commentary videos, if you've seen them, like just reactionary videos, but I was like, there's something missing here between just not doing enough research to have a fully formed opinion, which I really like giving, and just having the opportunity to influence people with information or emotions, kind of like you were talking about. Because I noticed that you do write for small to medium-sized creators, but is it just to do like just freelance gigs from time to time, like I'm going to do with you for research, or is one of the long-term goals to be to work for like a really big YouTuber for full time?
It's interesting. I've had a couple of creators, or more like agencies, reach out wanting to hire me full time. Yeah, I either turn down or like doesn't really work out. But I'm definitely interested in that. I mean, I'd love to work with people like Peter McKinnon, one of my favorite YouTubers, or like Drew Gooden and such. Definitely open to that. But I quite like the versatility of working with multiple people. It helps me learn more. It helps me improve, like, and broaden my portfolio a bit. Like, I'm open to different ideas and opportunities and such, you know?
At least for me, in my experience working with some of them, like low pay but very high expectations. But for you, what are some of the reasons why you wouldn't want to work for them?
Yeah, I do work for one, not full time, but just as like a freelancer, and that's been pretty good.
Okay.
There's always ups and downs to like, I mean, working with independent creators or channel owners versus a giant like or a larger company. So I'm not saying this for every one of them, but for a bunch of them that have like reached out to me, they're very bureaucratic. It's kind of like you're saying, they're usually heavier on like the budgets, but also the expectations. And it doesn't always mean that they're like as organized. They've got a lot of those processes like, oh, you need to jump through all these hoops, like which is those are in place for a reason. But yeah, it's hard to get on an individual basis, like with someone. You got to jump through a whole lot of hoops with a whole bunch of other people. And like, this video will be good, we just need to send this to our ideation team, or got to have a whole bunch of people review it, which there's merit to. But yeah, lack of agility, lack of flexibility, which you could which
Yeah.
kind of goes for like all businesses, I suppose.
Basically, what's something that everyone tells others to work on or improve in terms of script writing, but you think is a waste of time? Like, for example, a lot of people will say just a lot of stuff about random retention hacks, or there's just so many. What do you think's a waste of time?
It's such a good question because it's so easy to get like bogged down by all
Uh-huh.
the like hacks and tips, and there's more videos on YouTube about YouTube than like anything else. And obviously that's not true, but in my space I swear I see those all the time. What I've found is not all information is relevant and not all of it's true. So some might be true, but it might not apply to your particular channel. For example, if Jeff Bezos told me how to take a company from 10 million to 100 billion, it wouldn't really be applicable for me if I'm like under, like 5 million or whatnot. So, and I think that can be a lot of the case for a lot of others. And a lot of people are just spouting advice because they want people to, watch their videos and then their course and such like that. It's just taking everything with a grain of salt. I had one client quite a while ago who really nice guy, and he was like a higher up in business. So, and he had a whole bunch of people around him, giving him advice. We worked together in one video of a topic he gave me. It went pretty well. There's no hard feelings in this. And he was like, "Oh, sorry, I put us past my like the people I get advice from, or like a producer coach or something he had, and then like." Oh, they don't like the format. They don't really like the topic, so we're just going to shelf this one and continue on our way. It's like no problem. And I kind of wish I pushed back on this now. All his other videos didn't really perform very well, and he had about like more than 10. So he'd been doing this for a little while, and I was almost tempted to say maybe you should take some other advice because I don't think all the advice you're getting is necessarily good. It's easy to get caught up in the weeds, I think, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. Because yeah, even as someone that I think I'm a decent writer, and I'm trying not to worry about it too much, but just keeping people watching in terms of retention. Like you said, it is very easy to get bogged down of like setups and payoffs, or curiosity gap, or an open loop, and closing the loop, and it just gets very, I don't know, clogged up in terms of just write something. Just do
Yeah,
anything, and then you can study and see what people do and don't like in the comments and somewhat in the retention graph. So
you're absolutely right. And I think it's good to focus on the larger things. Say you're starting out and you're looking at all this stuff. I think
Mhm.
it's fine to like and look through that, and I don't think it's necessarily a waste of time, but I think it's also more important to just write and study the more holistic things of like what makes a good story, or like the fundamentals of grammar and such like that. And I've talked to so many people who know so much about all these hacks and tips, because the other big risk is if you go headfirst into this and do what everyone else is saying, you're going to look like everyone else, and that could be way more harmful than if you just didn't go all into it, if that makes sense.
no,
Like,
no, that makes sense.
yeah,
It's like
like,
how, at least for me starting off, with the video essays, but you do need to kind of copy in a way what you want to be, at least for a little bit, and then figure out your own style. Video essays, my only introduction to that was Sunny V2, which, whatever you think about him, he's okay now to me. Before I was just like, oh, this is great. But after doing his style after a while, I was like, oh, it's just kind of Wikipedia information and really good editing.
yeah, all those tips and retention loops and such. Though,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that shows like, yeah, getting all the small things right, but the larger picture, his brand suffering a bit, like for the exact things we discussed. Yeah.
You brought up something I did want to ask about, and I did really enjoy watching a ton of your video hooks. I think your writing, along with whoever was editing a lot of those business and video games ones, are really good. Because I was just like, oh, this is keeping me going for more than 30 seconds. Essentially, just how do you study videos and storytelling and apply to what you're doing? Essentially.
I think part of it comes down to like I kind of watch things intentionally now. Even if I'm doing it kind of subconsciously, I'm like taking a mental note of things. I do YouTube for a job, but I also like consume it in my like spare time. Ironically, it's when I'm just like absorbed in a video is when I go, oh, okay, there is something special here, and I might rewatch it and go, oh, here's what they did in the hook and such like that. It's after I've noticed that a video's really captured me that I might go, oh, okay, why is that? And review it. Maybe like the hook was really good, or maybe just it's such an interesting packaging or maybe it's just like really good storytelling and such. Once you've already been hooked, it's like, oh, okay, something good here.
It can be, at least for me, this is imposter syndrome. It can be a little intimidating to watch and study videos of creators that are better than you, but I think that's a part of the process. And just rewatching and understanding. And for me, sometimes I even take notes. It's like what you do really well in your hooks is like maybe not even just thought provoking, but a question that invokes curiosity. Versus like, here's why Drake Bell's career fell off, or same for Amanda Bynes, but nothing really inherently interesting or causing the viewer to feel or think about anything, which I think is
Mm.
really powerful.
There is value in just being like, this is why, like X, or X because of Y. It's actually good to just go straight into it because that's what the audience wants. There's a saying in
Yeah.
like the marketing saying that my first and like one of my last lecturers always drilled in was it all depends, because it all depends on the customer, which in this case would be the viewer.
Yeah, 100%. And every scriptwriter is different, but what are your thoughts on scripting audio visual elements? But this is something that box video journalists do really well. It's really
Mm.
time consuming, but it can be worth it in the long run. Of like every couple of sentences you have your B-roll planned out, you have this sound effect's gonna play here. But what are your thoughts on this? Like, do you think it's I wouldn't say a waste of time, but something that should be focused on when you're editing, or just what are your thoughts?
I think it depends on where you are. Let's say like you're starting out and you want to do all that stuff really well. It might just be better to focus on getting a really good video. And then as you get, say, the higher level channels with like people who are just like motion graphics artists and such you can work with. So you would have to gauge it based on your resources. Like if I would say one of my clients, I like mapped out all these insane edits I'd like have in mind. The editor might be like, what the hell? You just gave me a whole bunch of work. I would say it definitely depends on the scope of the channel and what the client's like looking for, but this can definitely help a lot. And when I'm writing, I usually have some ideas that come to me and I will mention them. I'll like lay them out. I can put this kind of clip here, or like do an edit of like maybe describe it. I always include like the references in the text for the editor and such, but it depends on how involved the process is from the start. Because if you don't have the framework there, say if like you're doing a bit of storyboarding and working back and forth with the editor, I think you can definitely do that. In some cases, it's almost better to give some ideas, but leave the editor to do their job and do it really well. It's good to have some ideas, if that makes sense. Not sure if
Yeah.
it entirely answers the question.
These are all very subjective questions. I mean, it's YouTube. Like, there's no direct correct answer for any of these. This is something I learned the hard way of, I write a full script, I record it, I edit it, and then I make the title and thumbnail. That's something I've learned the hard way, depending on how you make your videos. But the best advice I've been given and have seen the best results from is creating your title and your thumbnail packaging first. Because from what I've been told, that like forms just the whole narrative of the video. How much do you take that into account in terms of importance for writing the script, and how involved are you in that process with your clients exactly?
So I suppose like you, I've definitely grown to appreciate this a lot. This is almost like the inverted question from earlier. What's something that everyone tells you to do, which is a waste of time? This is one that's like, this is definitely worth your time. And I think all scriptwriters should know how video packaging works. So like the thumbnail and the title and like how that plays into the hook, because the hook, which is like the first 30 seconds of a video, the thumbnail and title, they're all part of one big package. Like the first 5 seconds is part of that. So if those are disconnected, it's going to be harder to get the viewer on board for the long run. Also because it will hurt like the overall package. With clients, I'll usually be involved with that, and we usually get that nailed down first. So we'll get a thumbnail idea, but usually the title and core takeaway, core curiosity, we map those out from the start. And then we go, okay, these are potential titles, but they all revolve around this like question or this idea. And then we write it. And thumbnail will usually be made later, but we've already decided on the packaging. I'll ask a bunch of questions about that, even if I'm not necessarily like being paid to like come up with the packaging and title ideas. It's so important, because if your video is even like kind of different to what you've advertised it as, people are going to click away, because they'll see that as clickbait, they'll see it as a broken promise. It's so easy for them to click off your video, even if they're like halfway through it. So yeah, just getting that right first saves a lot of like hassle down the line, I think. So important.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's a lesson a lot of new YouTubers learn the hard way, especially I did. Because again, it's people don't understand how much the packaging affects, like you said, the hook and the overall narrative of the story. Because I can't bring up a specific example for me, but there was a time where like I had a pretty decent script, honestly, and then I made the thumbnail last, but I just made so many changes with the thumbnail and title, it just didn't match with the script anymore, and obviously not the most popular videos, so very, very
Yeah.
important process.
Yeah. And even like just providing that viewer guarantee, like with a recent client, the thumbnail included like a image of Red Dead Redemption. So I made a point like, oh, we need to show Red Dead Redemption in the first 30 seconds, even if we're not talking about that specifically, if it's that's just like nice imagery, because people they'll see that and they're like, oh, I'm looking for that now. So you need to fulfill your promise. You know, you need to show the viewer that you're trustworthy. Otherwise, they're gonna be like, this isn't what I came here for. Even if it's something small, they're watching like a video for a big argument and you're making that. Fulfilling those promises is key because it builds like that trust. You know.
Because every writer, every YouTuber, totally different, crazy processes of, they'll jot down notes here or there. They'll like be thinking in bed and then just get up and start writing because they don't want to forget it. What's your video script writing process like? Like, how do you go from a blank page to just a completed product?
Big part of it at the start, getting that packaging right. And sometimes I'll have an hour call with a client, figuring that out. What's the takeaway? Like, what are the promises that we're providing? And like, what's the core intrigue? There's so many ways you can do that. Like, you could be asking a question, or it could be a counterintuitive one, or like something contrarian, like this product's bad, but it made $1 billion. Figuring that out first and kind of laying that out is crucial, and then mapping that out into like a mind map or whatnot is important because it's good to have, I guess, a compass if you're navigating it. If I was to use a metaphor, otherwise you're kind of going in blind, and you might have to circle back to that. Sometimes we go back and forth like that, but once we've got the core intrigue, the takeaways, so like the promises that we're setting up and fulfilling, from there it's like writing it out. And so we've got the structures in place, and now I'm just like filling in the blanks and such, and getting from point A to point B, like maybe setting up some things throughout the way, like those curiosity loops people always talk about, but basically giving people reasons to care about the video,
Yeah, I mean, that's basically the whole point of, I guess, all of it, especially the packaging. I mean, it sounds harsh when you talk to like newer YouTubers about it. It sounded harsh to me when I was given this advice, but the biggest question you need to ask yourself is why should people care? And when you just see certain videos, and again, it sounds harsh when you're critiquing people, but it's like, why would anyone care about this? Why should anyone care that GTA 6 is releasing in like, I don't know, like 2 years? Because we all know that. Why should I care? So I like that.
Yeah, it ties into a recent book I've been reading. I actually have it here by June Casagrande. It's called "It Was the Best of Sentences Is the Worst of Sentences." It's a really, really good book about writing, but one of the core pillars of it is that the reader is king. So in this case, the viewer is king. And that can be kind of tough because when we write, we often think, oh, I'm writing for me or I'm writing for the client. But in actuality, you're writing for the person who'll be consuming it, so the viewer. And so I have to remind myself, I'm not actually writing for the client. I'm actually writing for the end viewer, but the client's the one, getting paid by the video and then paying me to write about it. So always keeping that in mind. Like, why should someone care? And that's a big thing people struggle with. Like one client who's a very successful business owner and such. This was a big learning point for him. When I was a call with him, he said like he got some advice from a producer of a very, very big channel, and he said, like, bro, no one knows who you are. No one cares about you. And even though in the business world, he's like movie star, but he's like, oh, that's so true. No one knows me, even if I'm worth, however many millions. Viewer is still king, reader is still king. But people do start to care if you've got like a following, people are interested in your opinion and such. And I'm not invalidating like you should share your personal stories and such because that can tie into it. It's just when packaging and thinking about it, like, why would this person want to go on this journey with me?
Yeah, and a follow-up I had is like, it took me, again, hard way of learning that a lot of smaller YouTubers don't care about is just the building of avatars. Because, again, like we just kind of pointed out, like we're talking to a specific set of people for most videos. Obviously, there's going to be videos that apply to everybody, but a good portion of the time you're talking to a specific kind of person. Like, for example, your video game or business related channels. That does not apply to everybody in the world. That only applies to a select few people that have played video games, they care about video game narratives, or they care about business companies, what's going wrong, etc. So for you, do your clients like give you an idea of who you'll be writing for, or is that something you figure out on your own?
Unfortunately, I have to say no, but it's something I wish clients knew more because it's so important. Knowing who the audience is, and you can say, "Oh, it's people who like my content," but no, that doesn't count. Mapping that out, and in marketing, it's the customer profile. Figuring that out is good, and it doesn't have to be a specific like subset. It could be a really large group of people, but once you figure out those personas, identity, what they're looking for, it helps you a lot with how you position your channel and such. For example, another channel I've worked for in the past, we were positioned as more like we're looking for slightly more educated business people. Not, I wouldn't say contention, but discussion was like, oh, we want to make this really accessible. But in actuality, we didn't want to make it too accessible because we wanted it to be specifically for people who really care about like the weeds of business and all that stuff and feel like they're learning. Because if we make it too dumbed down, we make it open to everybody, and a product for everyone is a product for no one. You may have to make people care, but it's making the right people care. A higher educated people care about this. Not only because that gets higher revenue, because it's a higher educated, higher spending power audience, but also making it a little bit more heavy actually kind of weeds out some people who aren't in our target audience, but means it's more concentrated the people we want, which doesn't work for every channel, but it means like the RPM is much higher per video, more targeted recommendations from YouTube and that kind of stuff. It's good to have that in mind and how that affects your strategy because it's so important. If you're copying the style of Mr. Beast with like heavy retention editing and such, or the fast-paced quick cuts and all that, but your audience is like people in their 30s to 40s, they're going to get fed up with you and they're not going to watch any of your videos. And I see that.
Yeah.
Because I see this in the comments. People are like, I'm so sick of this style. Other YouTubers see, oh, this is the meta. You need to do this. But for their audience, it actually hurts them. We got a comment recently on Going Indie. It's one of my clients. And you could say this is an example of that, where Cam, who's the owner and the persona, enunciates a lot of the words every single time. Like kind of like that. Not all the time, but that's a big thing. Like, oh, you need to enunciate everything. You need to like make sure everything's really, really dramatic. But some of the comments were like, you shouldn't do that as much. It's a bit distracting. Like reader is king, viewer is king. If my viewer doesn't like this, why am I doing it? You need to do that for where you're wanting to go, and your existing viewers might not be in that category. But like I said earlier, not all advice is relevant.
Yeah, exactly. And the book you mentioned was called The Best of Sentences is the Worst of Sentences. Is that right?
So the book's called It Was the Best of Sentences. It Was the Worst of Sentences. My friend Javid, who owns Good Blood, he recommended it to me. Really good, really good.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out as well. Thank you. So following up in terms of processes, what is your research process like? If you want to
research? Yeah, no, fair enough. Sometimes we do this before the packaging is sorted. Sometimes we do it after. It depends on whether we've got the takeaway or we've got the takeaway. We need to find if like that's actually true. Pulling from a bunch of different sources, finding out what's like accurate. Because if sometimes we're like, oh, we're basing our argument on this quote from this person. I'll look at it. It's like, oh, it's actually not from the person we thought it was, or that was taken out of context. And we want to make sure we're like a trustworthy source. And people find that out. They'll be like, oh, that's not true. Blah, blah, blah. Researching and finding that thing that's like, oh, this contradicts popular belief, or it's a new way of thinking about things. Finding like that revelation that's gets you excited. You go, wow, I didn't know that. Because we all like learning. We just don't like necessarily going through the process of doing it. So taking that and putting it to the page, if you find that, it's so good because it's if you get excited or like really fascinated by it, other people probably will.
Yeah, no, I mean that goes with my follow-up. And I was actually given, but the best advice I I heard last week, and it's a nice reminder, is like, what's the most surprising thing about this video topic that will be interesting to other people? Like, for example, I'm writing about how The Boys does satire really well. If you've seen that show on Amazon Prime Video, how they do satire that compares to the United States. My advice that I was given was like, okay, what's the most surprising thing about that? And I'm like, oh, we'll see. So my follow up is like, how can you turn research into something that's interesting so that it's not just a wiki page read off?
That's a great question, and I don't know if I have a perfect answer for this, but it's kind of plays into the things we're talking about earlier, where this is where all those kind of tips come into it, right? It's like retention hacking or curiosity loops. It's giving the viewer breadcrumbs and leading them on a journey and telling a story that's like relevant and leads to it. You're not just going to say, hey, did you know blah blah blah, like that's so cool, right? It's like positioning it maybe as a question, like why does this work so well, and then maybe you like tackle other answers that are wrong and such, and then you lead them to like the takeaway. So taking the viewer on the journey, figuring out why they care, that kind of stuff is like so important, and making it just not like a wiki page. It's like and cutting out the fluff, I think too. Context is important, but it's not always the most important thing. Some people be like, why this? And then Johnny was born at this place at this time, and he started as this, and it's like no one cares. Something might be really interesting, but it's not directly related to like your core like aha moment or the core like thesis. So you might have to cut that, and maybe that makes its way to another video or its own video, but keeping everything relevant, everything refined, focused, again, on that packaging from the start, like doing the research, figuring out what the takeaway is and such, and then putting that to paper in a really like refined way. So you lead the viewer on like a journey.
Yeah, super excited for us to work together, not gonna lie, because the Disney video became bigger than I thought it would be. And it's like, okay, here are these interesting points, but also there's a ton of research that goes into just kind of what we we're talking about. There's just so much you could cut that's just not really interesting or relevant to Disney acquisitions. It's like, well, hear about Star Wars, this and that, but does anyone really give a damn in the comments? I have no idea. So...
Yeah. Another thing I'll say for like, say someone's wanting to know, how do I find those good stories? Go outside your comfort zone for research. Don't be afraid to look at academic articles. I know they're really boring, but like get comfortable, because you don't need to read the whole thing. You just need to read like the summary or takeaways or like the abstract. Some of them are really, really good though. And often if you show you've done your due diligence, the viewer will trust you more and be more hooked, and that can help your video perform better. Maybe it helps the viewer go from like maybe a bit apprehensive to like a really loyal viewer, So being okay going outside the zone and looking where people aren't looking and actually reading.
Yeah, like there's stories and everything. Like to your point, I think Ali, if you've ever heard of him, which I think you might have, but Ali Abdaal does that really well in his videos of like, he just doesn't read off the research paper. He like adds a story to it, whether it's like a real story or a personalized story. So I like that a lot. But entrepreneurs that have like $5 in their pocket in New York City, like everything you know now, being in that moment, what would you do to become a CEO of whatever millionaire company? If that makes sense. It's kind of like that, but for YouTube.
It's hard to say exactly, but I would just say to like just write a whole bunch and go outside your comfort zone a bit more, because I just wrote about what I liked, which is perfectly fine, and I still do that a lot, but also trying new areas and new topics is a big important one. And this applies to like any new scriptwriter. The stuff you make that you're passionate about is very important. So previous comment, writing about like other things, getting a bit more flexible, because when you try new things, that's when like you build new creative muscles. But also having stuff that's just like for you and like that you're passionate about is very important as well. Like I've gotten so many clients, partially through my like successful client videos, but also they look at say like my personal stuff and they say, wow, look at all this passion and such. Even if it's not necessarily like on paper like super successful, people see that and they see like you trying new things, and usually it's really good to have your own stuff, So I would say make more of that, even though it can be hard to. I would say just make more. It doesn't need to even be perfect, but just more practice. I would say just doing it and stop being so intimidated.
Yeah, that's for me. We don't have to get too much into that, but yeah, again, it can be intimidating to feel inadequate of like seeing who you want to be. Thankfully,
Mm,
I'm not obsessed with trying to be Mr. Beast because that's a high bar that very little people can get to. But yeah, doing more than
mm.
overthinking is the best advice for any of this YouTube stuff.
Yeah, I think so. Just doing. It's better to do a whole bunch of practice and learning from mistakes. Because if you like say you watch every single YouTuber video on like or every thread on how to make a perfect video, it'll probably help you a bit, but it's not going to do anything if you haven't like written before. So
Yeah.
you have to learn through doing.
So what are ways that creators can influence viewer emotions through writing? Like this can be through feelings of curiosity or feeling even sadness for just stories being told. And let me know if you want an example, but I think you have a good idea of what I mean.
Yeah, this is a tricky one because there's so many ways you could do it, but one
Yeah.
example is through the pacing, if that makes sense. A good tip for people to do is to change up the flow of things because not only does that keep people more engaged like throughout the whole thing, but also can be quite powerful. Like moments where like the video might stop and like the narration might stop is quite good. You take like a moment and then move along also, or sometimes not talking and letting the footage speak for itself, And a tricky question, but it's sometimes stopping and thinking, how are the other elements playing into this? And sometimes the absence of things is really, really strong. When things are really quiet, we notice like that's when we like suddenly notice how quiet it is. So that can be very impactful. People get annoyed when it's like an endless stream of fast-paced information. It's like slow down. So up and down. People like up and down, and people like variety.
Yeah, like for me, I'm trying to, and it's tricky, but it's actually kind of helpful. Just saying how you feel during a movie and then trying to apply that to a YouTube video. It's like you said, there are some creators that do this very well of just letting silence speak rather than having the music playing the entire time or having a
Mm,
voiceover the entire time, which I'm trying to move out of myself. Yeah, you can just take a
mm.
lot of elements from movies and apply it to your videos.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do that, but that's just one example, I think.
So what do you think is the secret to writing good video hooks? Like what have you done that's gotten people to stay watching past that 30-second mark?
The hook is so difficult because it needs to be like the best written part. It needs to be relevant to like the packaging. It needs to set up like a reason for the viewer to care. It needs to tie into like the end of a script as well, or like payoff. And it usually needs to set up promises. Those are all like key components, which is really hard to do, but it's just practicing that. Something that works for me is setting up a question or like curiosity. See, like, why did blank do blank? Like, I'll use an example. A video I wrote, which did really, really well. It's called Why League of Legends Should Be Dead by Now. And it's like, why is League of Legends still so popular? And we ask that question and we say like, it's got all these, stats, but it's also like this many years old. There's all these competitors. Why is it not dead? And we set it up and then we build further and basically drive that point home as hard as you can so the viewer's like, oh, okay, this is an interesting question. Then they go, oh wait, that is true. Yeah, you really like hammered in. You really build it up and set up the rest of the video so they're really hooked and really strong. And then you don't want to bog down a hook too much, but it's good to set up like a couple of things that you can answer throughout the video, loops and payoffs and such. The first like 30 seconds is all about getting them on board and getting them hooked, getting them to care and such. There's a lot of ways to do it. Asking a question, opening a loop. Another one's the counterintuitive one, which I really like. Like this game is like a 10 out of 10, yet it bombed. Like why? Like all the other things I mentioned, connecting it, making it relevant, making it pay off, setting up promises, but also building it on this curiosity, that curiosity. Because we want to, we like have the satisfaction. We're curious people by nature. We like setting up a story. We like stories and such.
Yeah, so like for that League of Legends one, it sounded like you focused a lot of doing the research first and really just digging into that to find like we talked about, the most interesting and surprising point. Is that what you did first? Like a lot of intensive
Mm,
research, or was it just
yeah.
like off the top of the head stuff.
So this is an example of how packaging can change, because we had the idea and like the takeaways, and then I did a ton of
Yeah.
research, and I'm like, because we were going to compare it to Heroes of the Storm, which is another MOBA by Blizzard, and because that's like the one that the channel owner has a lot of experience. But after doing a heap of research, I'm like, well, there's actually another game that released around the same time that would contrast way better. And the story is really interesting because, they came first, they the better game, but the business model was different, so they failed in comparison. So that was so important in finding all that and making sure the things were actually, the promises and the takeaways are actually true, and if they need to be tweaked and stuff. Yeah, there was so much research in that video, but it paid off. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Telling a story.
And yeah, just one more question. We can plug your stuff. So I wanted to know, like, what resources, websites, people, books have you found to be the most helpful in helping you improve your writing?
It's hard to say that, actually. Some people ask me, like, oh, what courses do you use and such. There's the book I just mentioned for one, but honestly, it is just like a ton of like practice. Yeah, having a degree helped, but that's not really applicable for most people because that just forced me to write outside my comfort zone. So I'd say that as well. Like, try practice is a big one. I think also finding like someone who can mentor you or someone who can give you feedback is good. Something that didn't help me was I liked getting into like creator discords with other YouTubers in my area or like in my kind of niche. But if none of those YouTubers are doing well, they're probably not all going to give you the most relevant, best advice on like, say, your thumbnail or your script and such. They might give you some good stuff, but I'm like, oh, this is actually not actually that helpful. So finding the right people to give you help and practicing. Something I did and still do every now and then is I get ChatGPT to give me a bunch of like exercises. Say like, I'll write me a hook about this video with this payoff, and like I write like 100 words and such. Going outside your comfort zone and like topics you might not usually write about. I'm just doing that a whole bunch, flexing those muscles and such. And if you're really good at writing, say, conclusions, start writing other parts over and over again. Keep practicing in the right way, I'd say as well. I keep writing this thing in all my scripts, but it isn't actually helpful. That reflection can be tough, but it's important to do, I think.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify the last thing that cut out a little. It only cut out a little bit, thankfully. But you said, like, if you're good at conclusions, you should keep writing them? Or what was it you said regarding the conclusion part?
So say you're really good at finishing a video and driving it home.
Yeah.
You should probably practice the other steps as well. And not just like,
okay,
because that might be what you want to do. So like, oh, I'm really good at like going hard and like doing the landing, but you should probably practice the hook more, and you should probably practice getting from A to B. Say you're really good at that ending, but you can't keep people around to get to that point because you don't like writing the rest. It's all for naught, So practicing all parts of it, even the stuff that you don't necessarily do a lot or want to do, just flexing those creative muscles,
Yeah, gotta practice even the most boring things you don't want to do. But
cool.
But yeah, Rob, thank you for coming on. If you want to be found or have people pay for your services or anything, just find anything based on your work, where can they find you?
So I'm on Mighty Jobs and I'm on Twitter. My Twitter and personal YouTube is Prime Hylian, but my website, which is where most people go, is robertvivian.com. robertvivian.com is where you can see all types of work I've done, from more than just writing, even editing and thumbnails and other marketing related stuff. If you're interested in hiring me, you can submit fill out the form and we can get in touch. That's where you can get a general like a vibe check, I suppose.